Hollywood has always sold us a dream. Glamour, perfection, heroes in suits and starlets in silk. But behind every Golden Age premiere, behind every studio-crafted smile, there were men living lives so reckless, so chaotic, so completely out of control that the cameras could barely contain them. These weren't just actors. They were volcanoes in tuxedos. Some of them drank themselves into oblivion. Some left destroyed relationships, criminal records, and covered up crimes in their wake. Others fought the system so hard the system nearly buried them alive. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on 20 of the most dangerous, untamable, and wildly out-of-control actors old Hollywood ever produced. Some of these names will shock you. Some will sadden you. But every single one will remind you that the golden age of Hollywood was anything but golden behind closed doors. Let's begin. If old Hollywood had a patron saint of self-destruction, it was Errol Flynn. Born in Tasmania in 1909, Flynn arrived in Hollywood like a human thunderstorm, dashing, charming, and completely ungovernable. He became Warner Brothers' biggest action star through films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, but the real adventure was happening off-screen. Flynn's personal life was a minefield of scandal. In 1942, he faced criminal charges of statutory rape involving 2 teenage girls. Though a jury acquitted him, the trial opened a window into a world of excess that stunned even hardened Hollywood insiders. His mansion, Mulholland Farm, was reportedly equipped with 2-way mirrors installed so Flynn could observe guests without their knowledge. He was a man who treated the world as his personal playground, with no rules, no boundaries, and no breaks. His alcohol consumption was legendary and catastrophic. By his mid-40s, his liver was failing and his body had absorbed decades of punishment. When Errol Flynn died in 1959 at just 50 years old, the coroner noted he had the body of a much older man. He once said, "I've had a hell of a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed every minute of it." That was Errol Flynn, grinning all the way down. Charlie Chaplin was undeniably one of the greatest creative geniuses the cinema world has ever seen. He also had a personal life that modern audiences would find deeply troubling. Chaplin had a well-documented pattern of pursuing very young women. At 29, he married 16-year-old Mildred Harris. At 35, he married 16-year-old Lita Gray, who later described the marriage as emotionally abusive in her divorce proceedings. Proceedings so scandalous that copies of the filing reportedly sold on street corners like newspapers. He fathered children, faced paternity suits, and battled accusations of communist sympathies during the Red Scare. The U.S. government, which had long monitored Chaplin through J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, used his travels abroad in 1952 to revoke his re-entry permit. He left America and never came back. Comic genius, yes, but a man of deeply complicated and troubling choices. John Barrymore came from American theatrical royalty. The Barrymore family was to the stage what the Rockefellers were to oil. He had talent so immense that critics called him the greatest Hamlet of his generation. But Barrymore had one rival he could never defeat: the bottle. His descent into alcoholism was both spectacular and heartbreaking. By the 1930s, a man who once commanded the stage with Shakespearean precision was forgetting his lines mid-scene and arriving on set visibly intoxicated. Directors reportedly had his dialogue written on chalkboards off-camera. He burned through 4 marriages and spent money faster than studios could pay him. His estate, Bella Vista, a sprawling Los Angeles property, became a symbol of excess, eventually sold off in pieces to cover his debts. When he died in 1942 at age 60, he was essentially broke and his great talent had been swallowed whole by addiction. Hollywood mourned him, but no one was entirely surprised. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was, at his peak, one of the highest-paid entertainers in America. He was a physical comedian of extraordinary ability and a genuinely beloved figure. Then came Labor Day weekend 1921, and a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco that destroyed everything. A young actress named Virginia Rapp fell gravely ill during the gathering and died days later. Another woman accused Arbuckle of assault. The press, led by William Randolph Hearst's tabloid empire, went into a feeding frenzy. Arbuckle was dragged through 3 separate trials. The third jury not only acquitted him but issued a formal written apology, stating there was not a shred of credible evidence against him. It didn't matter. The public had already made up its mind. His films were pulled. He was blacklisted. The scandal directly led to Hollywood creating its own censorship system, the Hays Office, to prevent outside government regulation. Arbuckle died in 1933, just hours after finally signing a new studio contract. Justice came too late, and for Fatty Arbuckle, vindication was never enough to bring back what was taken. Clark Gable was marketed as the King of Hollywood, and for decades, audiences bought every bit of it. The dimpled smile, the confident swagger. He was MGM's most prized possession. But Gable's kingship concealed some very dark corners. His co-star Loretta Young later revealed in her later years that during the filming of The Call of the Wild in 1935, Gable had assaulted her, resulting in a pregnancy she had to conceal entirely. She disappeared from public life, gave birth, and then staged a fake adoption of her own daughter, Judy Lewis, to avoid scandal. Judy Lewis herself didn't learn the truth until adulthood. MGM's publicity machine worked tirelessly to keep Gable untouchable, and it succeeded for decades. Gable was also a relentless womanizer who pursued married women without remorse and reportedly treated many people in his personal orbit with cruelty when cameras weren't present. The king had a kingdom built on silence. Spencer Tracy won 2 consecutive Academy Awards for Best Actor and is widely considered one of the finest screen performers in Hollywood history. He was also, by most accounts of those who knew him, a deeply troubled and at times dangerous man to be around. Tracy was a severe alcoholic whose drinking binges could last for days. He would vanish without warning, show up on set erratic and volatile, then deliver a perfect performance as if nothing had happened. Colleagues described his mood swings as terrifying, warmth and generosity in one breath, explosive rage in the next. He had a decades-long relationship with Katharine Hepburn that both parties publicly denied, partly because Tracy refused to divorce his wife on religious grounds, and partly because Hollywood expected a certain image. Hepburn reportedly dedicated enormous energy to managing Tracy, protecting him from himself and from a public that would have been shocked by the reality behind the legend. He died in 1967, and Hepburn wasn't even permitted to attend his funeral publicly. 2 great careers, 1 devastating secret life. Robert Mitchum didn't try to hide his rebellious nature. He wore it openly, almost proudly. In 1948, he was arrested for marijuana possession at a Hollywood party, a career-ending offense by the standards of that era. Mitchum responded with a shrug and a quip, comparing the arrest to being caught with a beer. Instead of destroying him, the scandal oddly enhanced his screen persona. Audiences loved the idea of a man who genuinely didn't care what anyone thought. But Mitchum's recklessness wasn't all Hollywood myth-making. He was known for volatile on-set behavior, physical confrontations, and a general contempt for authority that made him difficult to ensure and even harder to direct. He once reportedly showed up to film a scene so intoxicated he could barely stand and still delivered a compelling take. Whether that's admirable or alarming probably depends on your tolerance for chaos. Mitchum was one of a kind. A man who defined cool by refusing to try. Marlon Brando changed acting forever. His raw, psychological approach introduced a generation to a completely new way of inhabiting a character. He was brilliant, unprecedented, and almost entirely impossible to work with. Brando's on-set behavior became the stuff of industry legend. Demanding, unpredictable, dismissive of scripts, and contemptuous of directors he didn't respect. He gained enormous weight between productions, refused to memorize lines, and had his dialogue taped to co-stars' foreheads during filming of Superman and Apocalypse Now. His personal life was a cascade of tragedy. His son Christian shot and killed the boyfriend of Brando's daughter Cheyenne in 1990. Cheyenne later died by suicide in 1995. Brando, already a man prone to existential despair, was never the same. He famously sent a Native American activist, Sachin Littlefeather, to reject his Oscar for The Godfather, a political statement that horrified the Academy and thrilled his supporters in equal measure. Brando was volcanic, magnificent, and ultimately consumed by the same intensity that made him great. James Dean appeared in exactly 3 major Hollywood films. He didn't need more. East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant were enough to make him one of the most iconic figures in American cultural history. He was also reckless in ways that bordered on self-destructive. Dean was obsessed with speed, motorcycles, sports cars, and the adrenaline of pushing machines to their limits. His fellow actors begged him to slow down. Even the actor Alec Guinness reportedly warned him directly upon seeing his Porsche 550 Spider, predicting the car would kill him. 1 week later, on September 30, 1955, Dean crashed that car on a California highway near Shillam and died at just 24 years old. He had received a speeding ticket just hours earlier. The impact on popular culture was seismic. Dean became the permanent symbol of youth, rebellion, and beauty cut tragically short. But behind the myth was a deeply troubled young man, wounded by an absent mother, raised by relatives, and driven by a need for validation that fame couldn't fill. Rock Hudson was manufactured by Universal Studios into the ideal post-war American man, square-jawed, wholesome, and devastatingly handsome. He starred opposite Doris Day in a string of romantic comedies that made audiences swoon. He was also gay, in an era when homosexuality could result in criminal prosecution, social ruin, and the immediate destruction of a career. Hudson lived for decades in carefully managed secrecy. The studio arranged a marriage to his agent's secretary in 1955 to deflect persistent rumors. The marriage lasted 3 years. Hudson maintained the fiction publicly even as he lived his real life behind closed doors. In 1985, he became one of the first major public figures to disclose an AIDS diagnosis, and the announcement sent shockwaves through Hollywood and American society. His illness forced a national conversation about AIDS at a time when the disease was being largely ignored by mainstream institutions. Hudson died in October 1985 at 59. His courage in his final months arguably did more to humanize the AIDS crisis than years of public health campaigns. Tab Hunter was a manufactured dream, blonde, athletic, and precisely the kind of face that sold movie magazines in the 1950s. Warner Brothers promoted him relentlessly, and teenage girls across America plastered his image on bedroom walls. The studio also worked overtime to conceal the fact that Tab Hunter was gay. When he was arrested at a private party in 1950, a gathering that drew police attention, the studio buried the story entirely. Fake dates were arranged with starlets. Photographers were given staged romantic moments. Hunter was essentially performing 2 roles simultaneously, the one on screen and the one in public life. The psychological toll was enormous. He has spoken in later years about the constant fear, the isolation, and the performance of a self that wasn't his own. When he finally published his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, in 2005, it became a window into a Hollywood system that routinely destroyed people to protect its product. Hunter survived. Many others didn't.